Welcome back, it's me, Lou. I'm here for another action figure review. Today from Funko, in their Savage World line, we have Thundercats Lino. Alright, so today is May 18th, 2025. The other day, I was just looking at my wall of action figures, and then this kind of caught my eye. Just because Mattel, they're coming out with their line of Thundercats action figures in the Masters of the Universe Origins line. And when I saw this, I'm like, you know what, feels very appropriate and timely just to do a review on the old Funko Thundercats action figures. Now, many of you are probably familiar with Funko because they produce Funko Pops, the kind of like oversized bobblehead vinyl figures. There was a period of time when they were producing a lot of different like normal action figures. And for me, I thought it was a cool thing. It was nice to see the company branch out and do different form factors. I was a huge fan of their Game of Thrones action figure line. And I just adored the Savage World line of 5.5-inch scale action figures. I thought they were awesome. I could be wrong, but I think the Savage World line of action figures predated the Masters of the Universe Origin figures at retail, maybe by a year or two. But I do think Mattel had the leg up because they had that convention exclusive, I think, prior to Savage World being released, at mass retail. But these figures were awesome. It was very cool back in, I think it was like 2017 or 2018 when these came out, to go into like your local Target and then to see these action figures on the shelves alongside like the play sets and then the steeds. And for me, it just kind of took me back to like when I was younger in the early 80s when Masters of the Universe first came out. So it's a nice throwback into the design. And I kind of felt like Funko, they were kind of, ahead of the game. This form factor is very popular right now, especially like in the world of wrestling collectibles. There's a lot of companies producing that similar 5.5-inch scale action figure that was produced by like Mattel and Remco during the early 80s. And it was just awesome. It was the perfect marriage of familiar IPs alongside this classic action figure design. And it was just awesome. I think the one thing that hurt Funko, though, is that, if I remember correctly, the quality control on some of these figures weren't the greatest, and it wasn't necessarily consistent across the board. Some figures, they would kind of like break at the ball joint at the hips because the joint was too snug. But for me, it's like it wasn't a big issue because it's not like I was playing with these toys. For me, they're more so display pieces. And it's just a cool throwback, to my youth. The card art is beautiful. We have the Savage World logo above the Thundercats. A nice inset of Lino right there. There's a small little baggie that comes with a Sword of Omens and his glove. And on the back, we have Wave 1 and Wave 2, and I believe in my collection I have all of them. So maybe sometime in the future, I could probably review these. I bought this at my mall at FYE, For Your Entertainment, and it was for like $11.99. And it's crazy how much cheaper action figures were back then as opposed to now. Nowadays something like this might command anywhere between $19 to $25 at a store. But it's cool. Back then, figures were very, very affordable. Wave 1 was amazing. We had Lino, Panthro, Mumra, Slythe. Wave 2, Tigra, Chitara, Monkeyan, and Jackalman. And yeah, produced by Funko. Alright, so I do have a loose copy of this figure on hand, which I have right here. It's a very, very orange figure. Much like Lino is, and it's beautiful. If you grew up on the original Masters of Universe action figures, this form factor is just perfect. As opposed to having the rubber band, which held the legs together in the original Motu line, this one actually has ball joints. But like I said, some figures, they're prone to breakage because the ball joint was too tight. But otherwise, the figure, it does a good job of mimicking that 1980s style of action figure, produced by either Remco or Mattel. The heads, basic swivel movement, and they're hard plastic. They're not squishy. They have movement in the arms. There is no waist swivel, but that's all right. There might be, unless it's stuck. It's been a while since I've oh, there is. Okay, this has been a while since I've handled these figures, and I'm not going to move the legs around for fear of breakage. But yeah, gorgeous looking figure. And then here it is next to a modern Mattel Masters of the Universe Origins He-Man. And you can see, the proportions are different, but, they're kind of within the same scale or family. And the He-Man here, he really needs to be posed with his legs slightly bent to recreate that kind of like 80s pose. So yeah, it's, it works well. So if you're a fan of this style of action figure, it's worth hunting these down, especially if you can find them for a very reasonable price. I don't think these go for too much nowadays, especially now since we have Super 7 and Mattel making 5.5-inch scale Thundercats. And I do have another Thundercats figure on hand from the line. I have the Savage World Mumra, which we see right here. Gorgeous looking figure. This is one of the more detailed ones. There's so much going on with the cape, the headdress, and all the mummy ribbons or bandages on his body. So overall, fantastic looking figure. And I do, before I forget, here is a Super 7 Lino from the Streamlined Deluxe DX line by Super 7. Thundercats fans will know there's very, very different color schemes with Lino. Some are more so based on the animation. Some others are based off of the vintage toys. And this does not want to focus. Let's get you into focus real quick. There you go. And there's your buddy. Yeah, you can see the difference in height and build. But yeah, great figure. So if you find these figures, at a flea market, comic book convention, or a local collectible toy store, and if they're reasonable in price, pull the trigger on it. They're nice. And a word of caution, if you do insist on trying to move the legs, first heat up the legs like in a cup of hot water just to soften the plastic. And once it's soft enough, you can actually move the legs without worry of breakage. So yeah, great figure. All right, so let's wrap this one up. Once again, my name is Lou. If you're new to my channel, welcome. If you are a returning viewer or subscriber, thank you so much for your continued support. I greatly appreciate it. So until the next video, be safe, take care of yourself, buy lots of toys, and most importantly, be happy. And I'll see you at the next one. All right, later.